Hello guys, and welcome back to our course where we're exploring some gambit lines from Black's point of view. And today we're going to conclude our series with probably the most important gambit, and actually the one who is considered as the main opening, not some kind of sideline which you want to play for surprise. And this is the Benko, or as it's also known, the Volga Gambit. It starts after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, and now of course black can go for the modern Benoni, which is also quite popular opening as well, or he can play the move b5, which is the beginning of this gambit. And like in all the gambits, of course, white have a choice. He can take the pawn or he can just play something else. But the best is considered for white to take the pawn. And actually it's not that simple for white to keep playing long time before to commit to take the pawn or to decide what to do. Because, for instance, let's say white wants to develop his knights. Okay, he can start with knight f3. This now gives already black many options. Here there are many deviations. You can take on c4, bishop b7, but let's say, okay, black just plays g6. And now, if white wants to move the knight to c3, then b4. And this knight, okay, now has to go back to b1. And then this is just a Benoni with a lot of extra moves for black. Some people play queen c2, trying to delay as much as they can. Yeah, this is some kind of a line which is, okay, possible for white, but sooner or later, let's say he can develop. But now again, knight c3, you can maybe go b4, and here usually they just take, and then it goes to some kind of Benoni positions, Benko positions, which we'll see later. This is one line, just quickly to show you, which is still part of the gambit, even if during the, all those moves black had other options not to sacrifice the pawn. Now usually black goes bishop, g4 after that, and the idea is to exchange this bishop in general and then to free the files, the b file and the a file, for the black rooks. And the knight from f6, depending on the line, he can go to d7 or g4. He's aiming to go to e5 or b6. And one possible line is this, for example, knight c2 and then knight d4. There are some games. But yeah, of course, there are many ways for white to play without to win the pawn. But we have to start from the moment where white takes. And now again, black has various move orders, d6, g6, but a6 is by far the main one. And yet again, white have many options, but we're going to see only the most popular, the two most popular moves, which are to take on a6 or to push b6, which of course already is not exactly gambit because black will take the pawn back. So this is some kind of Benoni type of position, but a little bit different, because in Benoni usually white always have the pawn on c4, and now he doesn't have, so he wants to use this outpost c4 for his knight in the future. And here there are as well many different positions for black. In the beginning, people used to just take with the queen. And then the game could develop if both sides are playing some normal moves. Let's say d6. So black is playing now Benoni, g6, bishop g7, and white is developing. So this is a very standard situation. And here black has to decide should he want to trade the bishop with bishop g4, which in Benoni usually is good, by the way, to go there. And then you can just develop the knight. White brings the knight to c4, black moves the queen, and there are various possibilities. Usually black wants to exchange this knight. You can try to go to e5 or b6, or black can go directly knight d7, and then to move the queen. So when this knight goes to c4, you can bring your knight to e5 or b6 to try to exchange it. But white can play a4 first, and then he wants to play a5, and then already you don't have knight b6. And if black goes a5, this will give as well the b5 square. So now rook b8 is the line. Now again, if knight c4, knight b6, so a5, this rook goes to b4 to try to do something. And when this knight goes here, sometimes black goes knight e5, and but in this case the pawn structure is a little bit not good. From the other hand, the rook is attacking the pawn. He can go to d4. This knight sometimes can go to e8 and d6. So this is some kind of a line. But later, after b6, more popular has become not to win the pawn immediately, but to develop first, and then even sometimes you can just take it with the knight. So you can just first develop the king side, and then when we go to position like this, to take with the knight. So the idea is not to give this tempo to move the queen to b6 and then the queen to c7. Immediately the knight is there and he is fighting against this knight d2 plan. And very important, of course, in this line is here to meet a4 with a5. So you are giving the b5 outpost, but this is not that important for white, because, okay, he can put the bishop or knight on b5, but this knight is not attacking anything, while the other knight on c4 is more annoying, because he also helps to prepare sometimes e5. And when they go here, this is another important idea, to exchange the bishops, and then to play this position where now you have the b file in the future, so you can try to put pressure on the b pawn. You can drop back the knight from f6 to d7, or if white places later his knight on b5, you can go knight e8, knight c7 to exchange it, to open the diagonal towards b2 as well. So this is more or less about the line with b6. But of course the problem is what to do if white wins the pawn. And what is the idea of this gambit? Because it is a little bit different from all the other gambits which we have seen for white and for black. Because usually the side who is sacrificing a pawn is looking for something very quick, some quick development, quick initiative to organize attack against the king in the center. Here black is giving this b pawn and he doesn't have any chance to attack, so people might ask, okay, what is the point to sacrifice this pawn? And here actually the reason, and also maybe we can understand why this opening is so in high regard comparing to all the rest. Like I said, it's a main opening. Tens of thousands of people are playing, not just people playing for surprise, including all the best players who have tried. Because here the thing is that black is looking for positional compensation, not so much for tactical. So the idea is not to create attack, but to activate all his pieces, to put them in the active position, and then to force white a little bit to defend. And basically now, okay, the simple, let's say if we can simplify the idea, we are sacrificing the b pawn, and the plan is later on these open files, the b file and the a file, to bring there the rooks, which are going to attack the white pawns. And white will be forced to defend those pawns, and it is very difficult, at least in the next 10-20 moves, for white to use his extra pawn, because even if you start exchange pieces, and let's imagine that you have some rook endgame, you bring your rooks to the a8 and b8, and the other guy has to defend the pawns. He has the extra pawn, which is the a pawn, but it's impossible, okay, or very difficult to promote this a pawn into a queen, because you can always block her with your rooks and to bring the king. So long term, you have long-term compensation, not something in few moves. Okay, now black has various move orders. You can take the pawn with the bishop. If you take the pawn, you have to do it here with the bishop. Or you can start with g6 or d6. It's usually not that important. The lines are just transposing very often. g6, I believe, is the most common move. But when white plays knight c3, now because he wants to play e4, so this is the time finally to take this pawn with the bishop. Because now if he plays e4, which of course is one of the main lines, black have this bishop f1 move, which will slow down a little bit the development of the white, because he will lose the castle and he has to organize some artificial castle. Or the other idea for white is to bring the bishop to g2. And now, yeah, this is indeed the important moment from white's point of view to decide between those two plans what to do with his light square bishop, to allow black to trade it or to put it on g2. Okay, let's first see if white goes knight f3. Black usually goes d6 to block this pawn, otherwise always you have to think that white can push d6 himself. And here again, of course, white can still go for e4 or g3, but okay, g3. Let's first see this line. What is the plan now for black? Here, again, the move order can vary. It's not maybe so important because castle and knight bd7 are the main moves, which usually just transpose, because even if you move the knight first, at some point you will have to castle. So it's, I think it is not so independent line. So let's say castle, castle, and then knight d7. Okay, this is the critical line. Okay, and from here there are many possibilities. White have many lines with more than 1,000 of games, which shows you how much games there are in this opening. So rook e1, rook b1, and queen c2 all those are the main lines, and they have a bit different ideas for white. There are some details which are: rook e1 has the idea to prepare e4. Rook b1 has the idea to move the rook from the diagonal, so white can play b3. Otherwise, if b3 now, maybe knight takes d5 is working. And queen c2 has the idea to bring the rook to d1 to defend the pawn on d5. So let's see quickly what is going on in all those lines. The good thing from black's point of view is that basically no matter what white is doing, the plan is more or less the same, because you have to place your pieces at certain positions. For the queen, this is maybe the most difficult part, because it is divided. If you move the queen, all the moves are played many times. Queen c7, queen b6, and queen a5. So you have equal number of games maybe in all the moves. But okay, c7 looks a bit passive, maybe. So this is between a5 and b6. Then the rook from f8 normally always goes to b8. So this is the idea which I told you. You have to keep the rooks on a8 and b8 and to look for some play on those files. The knights, the knights, they also don't have a lot of options, but one very common idea is to go knight g4 and then to bring the knight to e5 to exchange the knights, especially if white goes for e4 later. When you have knight e5 and bishop a6, this will give you the options to jump with this knight to d3, maybe. If it's not possible, then the other idea is to go knight b6 and then to drop the other knight to d7 from f6, and then knight b6. This knight can jump to c4 and to try to attack the b2 pawn. So yeah, now for instance, now again black have tried all those moves. Okay, let's start maybe with queen f5, which is the most common idea in the Benko. And now e4. This is one of the possible lines, and knight g4 immediately before white goes h3, because if white goes h3 already you have to take another route. And then again white obviously has many options, but bishop d2 is the most popular move, and now sometimes this knight can jump, but he doesn't have any dangerous move, so it's not a threat that the knight will jump. You can bring now the rook to b8. White has to defend the pawn, usually with his queen, and now when you go knight e5 immediately you see this square d3 is weak, so you can try to exploit it. And if white don't know what to do, black can even maybe win something. Bishop d3 is coming, knight d3. Now I think the best move for white is not obvious, very difficult, knight d1. And the idea is to move the bishop to c3, but okay, it's a very complicated game. So this is one possible line which looks completely fine for black. And the other setups here are knight b6, and after e4 knight d7. As I told you, this is also interesting setup, because now white doesn't have b3. So when he tries to prepare now b3, then you jump knight c4. And here the problem for white is that b3 will be met with queen a5. And now actually many strong players, even I have seen grandmasters with 2600, they go for this line, which is, I don't know if they don't know or what, but here in this case white is losing the exchange. Okay, he has of course compensation, but black is just totally fine here. You take the rook and then you have the b file, you can attack the c4 pawn. So b3 definitely looks like a mistake. And bishop f1 is one of the other main moves which are not giving anything. In this case, knight e5 you have to play, and let's say take. Now knight f3 is the threat, so white has to somehow defend it, and then you just go again queen a5, rook b8. Like I told you, more or less yeah, the same plan. Or knight g4 instead of queen a5 and knight b6, because now instantly after e4 knight e5 you can jump to d3. So white now has to take another approach. First to play queen c2 maybe, and then to wait a little bit. There is such idea to go f4, not so much, okay, maybe it's only 2-3 games. F4 is a little bit exposing, of course. From the other hand, now you have this check as well. So this is also possible. Okay, so this is in case of rook e1. If white goes queen c2, which is one of the other 3 main moves, once again here black have tried, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 moves. This is in a way a good thing that black has many options, because it's not that you have only one setup and then you have to play this. You have a choice. Many grandmasters are choosing different strategies. Like I told you, queen c7, queen b6, queen a5. It's not very clear exactly where this queen is the best. So everything is possible. But here again, queen a5 is what I think is played the most. Because from a5, you are freeing the b file for the rook. And also you are leaving the b6 square empty, so maybe the knight can jump there. And still, if white decides to move the rook from a1 to go to b1 or c1, the pawn on a2 could be attacked at some moment. And as we mentioned, bishop d2 is not so dangerous. Even if the queen is against the pin, the knight doesn't have where to jump. That's why most people prefer here. And from white's point of view, the idea of queen c2 is this is a very solid move, which wants to prepare b3, but also the idea is to bring the rook not to e1, but to d1, which could be maybe better, because now if white goes e4 in the future and black obtains control of this e5 square, and when you have knight e5, at least now knight d3 will be not a threat, or bishop d3, and the pawn on d5 is defended better. So I don't know, it's also possible. Now black has to continue with the standard idea, waiting to see what white will do. And again, of course, always there are various options for white. The move orders can vary, but rook b1 is, I think, the most played move here for white, which is he wants to prepare now b3, and then maybe bishop to b2. Instead of going bishop d2, he can try to bring the bishop to b2 to fight for this big diagonal. Now black usually follows with the other standard idea, knight g4. First you want to go to e5, and second you're not allowing b3 because the knight is hanging. So they had to put the bishop to d2, there is no way. And then knight e5, and for instance it can follow now knight takes, and in this line, actually with queen c2, one of the ideas for white is not to push e4, because he wants this pawn to stay on e2 to control the d3 square. That's why he has the opportunities, but he doesn't push the pawn. Instead he goes b3. Just he wants to neutralize the initiative. He wants to take control of all the squares in the center, to wait to see what black will do, and then in the future maybe he can start to push his pawns. And this actually is an interesting strategy for white, because now black has got all his pieces into the desired positions, but there is no follow-up. You don't have some move which is doing something instantly to create something dangerous. And often now, again, black have tried different ideas, but one move here was played even from Magnus Carlsen a long time ago, bishop c8, which I see is that this is the move which is played the most. Basically, black also is waiting, and he wants to go to f5 maybe, to force e4, then to drop back to c8, and then to go back to a6. There's some interesting maneuvering here. Of course, white also can wait with e4, but once you go bishop f5, he would have to play e4, because otherwise he's losing the rook. So usually they play h3, and now some people play bishop f5, provoking e4, and then they go back. Other people go c4 now, which is also a possible idea, c4, to try to exchange one pawn and then to create, let's say, weak pawn on the b file, so you can concentrate all your pieces against this pawn. So this is, queen c2 is very complicated move. And finally rook b1. Rook b1. And here black actually has a choice. This move allows now, apart from the normal move, also there is this idea, knight b6 immediately. And then you want to put pressure on this pawn. So now usually the idea of rook b1 is to follow up with b3 to avoid the troubles on the diagonal. But after bishop b7, white has to go e4. And now again, some people just go back, basically playing the same position, bishop a6, rook e1, knight g4, knight e5, and then you want to jump to d3. But other people go e6, just like in the modern Benoni, you want to destroy this center. So this is also possible, e6. Probably white will have to take, otherwise this pawn on d5 will fall sooner or later. And then black has the potential to create the center with d5 maybe, but it's complicated because white also has some ideas. He can sometimes push e5 to destroy your pawn structure. Most people go knight g5 and bishop h3, because now if you push e5, then somehow it doesn't look very good, but if you go here, it's a bit passive. So yeah, you have this idea knight b6, or as I mentioned, you can just go queen f5, and then they go bishop d2. Again, more or less the same moves. There is a very little difference with the previous line, where the rook was on d1, and now the bishop is on d2. And in this case, again, the fury continues. Actually, Benko is a line where there are many lines where the fury goes up and around 15-20 moves, because there is a lot of maneuvering, and the pieces usually go, you see, on the similar squares. So many people repeat these patterns a lot of time. And now, in this case, black is don't playing so much knight g4 in this variation, and he goes instead queen c7. And then the plan is, when they play b3, knight b6, attacking the pawn, and now white usually goes knight h4. This is the only way to defend it. And this actually is a theoretical line which goes for more than 20 moves. It's the first line. Now, queen b7. This move is not obvious. Of course, it's not very standard. But the point is that since e4 is not possible, white actually is giving this pawn, and here black can take, despite the pin. And this is, as I mentioned, a theoretical line. Many strong players are playing this. It looks a bit dangerous, but white doesn't have anything to use this pin. The main move is bishop h6, and now black goes e6. White takes, e4. Now black is losing the pawn on d6, but the line goes on here. Check, of course, and then e5. So white wins the pawn. You can think, okay, what is this line? We just lost the pawn. e5 is hanging, c5 is hanging, but there is a follow-up. As I told you, very long theoretical line. Queen e7, attacking the rook, and also the a2 pawn is hanging. So white has to go back to defend. And now this knight jumps to d4. And if you go knight d4, you will have very good compensation. Again, you have those open files. You have a super strong knight on d4, which, if white tries to go knight f3 and to take it, then you will get a pass pawn on d4 defended. So this is the critical line, where now white wants to take this pawn, and then the line goes like this: knight d4, threatening the fork, knight e2 check, white takes with the queen, takes. Now we are 2 pawns down, but this move is attacking the rook, and also is attacking the pawn on a2, and then if you take on a2, the b3 pawn will also fall, but white can defend everything. So it seems that black is in trouble until knight b3. If you take with the rook or with the pawn, in the end there is rook a1 check, and white will be forced to move bishop f1. So white can take this pawn instead. And now again, very nice idea, knight d2. If you take the knight, rook b1 check, and after rook takes, the next move is rook b1 check, and this is, yeah, it also, in the end, black, I think, will win the pawn, one of the pawns. So this is as well very interesting line. Okay, now let's see the lines where white goes e4 instead. So we have seen the g3 side lines. Now, of course, black have to take here, and then the game continues as usual. Now, white has to bring his king to g2. He can start with g3, or he can start first with knight f3. There is a little difference. Okay, of course, knight f3 could be played even earlier. White could play this on the second move, fourth, fifth, so maybe we can see what is the difference. The only independent line, which otherwise is not possible, is here, where black can play queen c8. Even recently, again, Magnus Carlsen has played this move against Ivan Cheparinov. The idea of queen c8 is to meet g3 with this check, and not to allow the standard king g2. Of course, okay, white, it's not dangerous for white. He will not be getting checkmated, because then he can play knight g5, and now queen g4 is the line. It's a little bit different from the other lines, but white can also avoid this with g3. So let's go for the main lines, king g2, and now knight f3. So already this idea is not existing. So what to do now? Yeah, so far it's all standard. Now it depends if white will play h3 or not, because knight g4, we know that this is the main idea. But what if they go h3? In this case, again, we can choose between the queen moves, queen a5 or queen b6, or even there is this idea rook a6, by the way, which also is possible later. In this line, where the bishops are off the board, rook a6 is a very standard plan. So this is one of the possible lines. And then the idea of rook a6 is actually to bring the queen to a8. And then, okay, you have the pressure on the a file. Also the queen here, sometimes you can prepare e6, so she can try to destroy the center. For example, this is a very common line, again, h6 always, and if he wants to take, it's okay. Usually they go back, and now e6, and white have to take, and then he's losing control in the center. So slowly, black now can play g5, because sometimes after e5 the pawn could be hanging. They go a4, and then d5, and this looks very interesting to me. Black have activity everywhere. On the queen side we have this pressure, on the king side g5 is something in the center, or you can just play some standard moves like queen a5 and rook b8 again. Here the difference is that in those lines often white goes e5. This is what he wants to do, to open the e file for the rook. And now this line usually take, and now rook b7 you have to defend. But then the plan for black, white usually moves the queen somewhere, queen f3, and then you go knight e8, and this knight goes to d6, which is, I think, a very good square for the knight. And again, white have extra pawn, but all the black pieces are active, and for white it's not easy to develop, and he has to defend all those pawns all the time. So this is another line. Or queen b6. Queen b6, I believe, is even the main move after h3. And then after rook e1, again you have this setup. The difference is that there was immediate pressure on the b2, which is forcing white to defend first the pawn, so he can release the bishop. And when he defends the pawn with the rook, then already you can move the queen to the a file, and even she goes here, not to a5, because this diagonal is more useful. And again they play something like this, and in this case this knight goes to b6 because you want to go to c4. So if you can go there and take the bishop, I think it's very good. Then you go knight d7 and you have a strong bishop. Later you're looking sometimes with c4 to attack those pawns, and knight c5 might be coming. So this is against h3. If they play rook e1, again, of course, there is this choice between all those moves: rook a6, queen a5, knight g4. Queen a5 here, there is this line where white goes e5, and in this case you should not take. You take only if the pawn is on h3. If she is not there, you go knight g4, because then you have the same plan. You go rook b8 basically, he has to defend, queen a6 to defend the d6 pawn, and then you just jump knight e5, and you play something like this, where you have bishop and good compensation. Or you go knight g4, which makes sense because if he didn't play h3, we maybe have to take advantage. Now they go queen e2. This is the main move, and then queen a5 is what is played most often. Although there is this line 95, this maybe deserves attention, is something different. So when they play f4 and you go back, now very popular for white is a4, which gives you the possibility to take this knight and then to take the pawn back. And white has a very nice center. He has the bishop, but it's not so easy for white to use this bishop. And here I have seen some games, because now you want to attack the rook, so white, okay, he has to do something. If he takes, you take with the queen and you take the file. And if bishop b2, black just goes knight a4 back, and then he has to move the bishop back to c1. So there are some games which ends with repetition. Or, as I mentioned, this is again the main line, knight d2, and now one interesting line as well, which is a bit different, is to take this knight. So the line goes like this: knight c4, queen a6, pawn takes, knight a5, knight takes, and this leads to one equal position, something like this, yeah, black has full compensation. This a pawn is very weak, so you have the b file, the a file. It can be something like this. Now there are some games. You can go rook a8, both rooks to a8. Even the engine thinks that you can just take on b1 and go back rook a8, and then put knight g4 to remove this bishop, or with f6, and he gives this as some 0-0s. So there are a lot of options, but as you see, the good thing is that you have a very similar ideas in all the lines. You have to go b5, a6, then take the pawn, d6, g6, bishop g7, castle. You can just make those moves, knight d7, and in the middle game you look for queen a5, you look for rook b8, knight g4 is the idea, knight e5. It's not so difficult to learn, I think, this opening, and you have always some positional compensation. Here the question is, do you like to play without a pawn, where you don't have some clear compensation? Because not everyone, of course, is happy to play without a pawn, but if you like to play active, I think this can suit to your style. So with this, our course is concluding. I hope that you have enjoyed and you learn a lot of new lines. I wish you good luck with studying the openings, and see you on our next course.